It could be a tree house. Yes, I really said that. A tree house. It can be an RV. It could be an apartment. It could be a house. It could be a room in a house. It also could be a boat. I know that sounds funny, but there are so many different things. So when we define property in short-term rentals, it has to do with the fact that it can be all sorts of different things.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
Hello. This is Jennifer Hammond. And as you know, I'm always interested in finding topics that will really help you and educate you so that you can make good decisions in real estate. Yay! So one question that's come up so often recently that it made me realize, wow, we really need to do a podcast episode, Facebook Live, and obviously we're in Clubhouse today to teach a little bit about short-term rentals. And the reason I realized this has become more and more is as people are looking at this real estate market, which is an interesting market. You know, we have interest rates going up and there's a lot of change in the market, but short-term rentals seems to be something that, again, other than the pandemic, and I will say during the pandemic, things shifted a lot for short-term rentals. And what I mean by that is literally, I had a short-term rental and there were cancellations. So you need to always make sure you factor that in when you go into any real estate investing that you do. But let's talk about that. Short-term rentals, when we first start with that, let's define them. So short-term rentals could be something that you rent by the day. It could also be something that you rent by the week. It could also be something you rent by the month. And say, for instance, so I'm licensed as a real estate agent in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. So that whole Washington, D.C. metro area. Recently, I've become licensed down in the state of Florida. And it's interesting because I've learned even more about short-term rentals in the definition of a short-term rental, meaning that some areas allow you to have the daily short-term rentals, meaning that every day you can rent it very similar to a hotel on a day by day. You could rent it 3 days, 5 days, 10 days. It's totally fine. And then other places don't allow you to rent daily, but they allow you to rent weekly, which is interesting. Or you're also going to find other places where short-term rental means only a month. So the shortest term is 1 month. And of course, for corporations who they send their employees different places, corporate rentals have always been very popular because they are a form of short-term rental. You also have vacation rentals. So you probably have heard of Airbnb, and you probably looked at some of the other sites, which we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about marketing of a short-term rental. But the most important thing I wanted to kind of start with was the definition. The definition of a short-term rental, what does that mean? Interesting, similar to the fact when we start with first-time home buyers, ironically, a first-time home buyer, it depends on that definition. And I just give an example quickly. In Washington, D.C. for a long time, a first-time home buyer for many of the programs was someone who had not owned real estate in Washington, D.C. for 1 year. So that's probably a different definition that you may have thought of before for a first-time home buyer. So anyway, back to short-term rentals. Short-term rentals means daily. It could mean weekly or it could mean monthly. It means a shorter term than the traditional of a long-term rental, which is a 1 year. You sign a 1 year term or a 1 year lease. And it's a very different than the ones when you're doing daily. And also the expectations of what you're going to have is different. So let's continue a little bit with the definitions, just so that we're all speaking the same language. So short-term rentals, again, are daily, weekly, or monthly. Then the other thing is you need to understand there is the property is different. The property that could be, and a great example is if you take a moment to look at Airbnb and you see what property is, it could be a tree house. Yes, I really said that. A tree house, it can be an RV, it could be an apartment, it could be a house, it could be a room in a house. It also could be a boat. I know that sounds funny, but there are so many different things. So when we define property in short-term rentals, it has to do with the fact that it can be all sorts of different things. And the interesting part also, I'm going to go off a little bit on a side, when we're defining that as well, it's really important to think about the fact that you can also give people, and if it's a vacation rental, you're also having the opportunity to give people an experience. So Airbnb does this very well, where it may be that they are interested in coming to an area and they want to learn about the different cuisine, meaning that they want to know, they want to go to Italy and they want to have a chef and they want to learn about how do we cook the cuisine of that area. It could be that they want to go to an area and they're interested in walking through the footsteps of the history in that area. And that's everywhere in the world. And so it's interesting as an owner, as a landlord, as a real estate investor, if you decide you want to do short-term rentals, you have all sorts of options here. And I wanted to kind of frame this in that it's only limited by your creativity and what you want. So if you live in Hawaii and you are interested in doing short-term rentals, it may be that you are going to create very interesting, fun adventures, or exploring the island, or doing other things that have to do with that particular area. So it's really important as we go through short-term rentals to understand that they're completely different than a long-term rental, and it's a very different strategy. So again, as I just wanted to go through a couple definitions before I just dive into this. So number one, we talked about definition of short-term: daily, weekly, monthly. Then property, of course, a tree house, an RV, an apartment, a house, a room in a house, or even a boat. There are all sorts of different things that could be defined as the property. Then we want to look at, instead of a tenant, this is usually defined as guests, very similar to a hotel. You have guests, you don't have tenants that come and stay. And the reason I say that is because, of course, and I am a licensed real estate agent in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, and now Florida, but it is very different in that the property is, and those guests, the laws that go around property and guests are different than the laws that go around something that is a long-term rental and that has tenants, because tenants have very different rights than guests do. Now, guests have rights, but it's different. So I just want you to understand the differences. And then, of course, you have probably heard before about ROI. So the return on investment is very important in any kind of real estate investing, but particularly with short-term rentals, you need to look at all of the expenses, and then you look at all of the income, and then you see if this is an investment that has a good return on investment. And we're going to go over some of those expenses as well as the profit that potentially can be there. And one of the things I wanted to give you an example of is, like, for instance, one reason that people do short-term rentals, like in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a lot of tourists that come to take a tour and look at the monuments, and go to the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C. And they love to come and be in a house where they have a kitchen and they have more of a family atmosphere, and then they bring the whole family. And that's a little bit more difficult when you're in a hotel. But also you'll find that, at least it has been my experience, I should say, with the short-term rentals, when people come to visit, also many times it's with people who have special needs. So it might be people who are in the elderly category, and they want something where, again, going to a restaurant for every single meal for 3 meals a day, it just becomes, they have dietary needs. They might have needs that, again, being able to have a kitchen where they can cook their own meals. And it might be just something that they really enjoy, is being able to have that. And maybe it's just that they prefer to do breakfast at home every morning, and then they can eat out for lunch and dinner. But it's a very different person who's coming to rent a short-term rental as a guest, again, not as a tenant. And that's why I wanted to make sure when we went through this training, we kind of go through some of the basics that are really important for you to understand. So as we go through that return on investment, some of the things to be considered are the fees. So depending on how you are marketing, you may have a company that markets for you, and we'll go through marketing a little bit more in detail in a minute, but there are going to be fees that they're charged. Then you need to know that there's like a sales tax. And I say because that's not my Valley girl coming out, but that is the thing that you need to know is that there's all sorts of different possible taxes that can happen depending on your jurisdiction. Now, every jurisdiction is different about this. Washington, D.C. is different than Virginia, and Washington, D.C. is different than Maryland. Washington, D.C. is very different than Florida as far as short-term rentals. And when even in the state of Florida, depending on the area you're in, and also the city as well as the county you're in, you need to understand what are the fees for that area. And it could be sales tax, it could be all sorts of other fees that are required. And you just need to understand that, including it could have a capital gains. Let's start with a hotel tax. There could be a hotel tax. There's also the possibility that you could have, and again, this will be something you want to talk to your accountant on, but the capital gains tax, depending on when you're buying and selling the properties. And you'll find that again, and I found that there are people who love short-term rentals, and they can establish a short-term rental, and they love the creativity of finding a property, establishing it, getting it completely set up with the beds, with the couch, with the TV, with the cable, with whatever they decide to do. But what they are setting up is they're actually setting up this amazing little creation. It's almost like art in the fact that you really want to make sure that people are having this place that makes them feel like it's worthy of whatever fee they're paying. And one of the reasons that this is so critical is to understand with short-term rentals, just like when you go to a hotel, you think about this. You have the opportunity to choose whatever hotel you want. You prefer a hotel that makes you feel like it's clean, like it's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing, and that it has the features that you're looking for. So when you look at it and you think about, if you go on to one of the websites that there's so many different websites. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more with the marketing. But if you go on to even Airbnb and you have the opportunity to choose what features are important to you. So as a landlord, if you're a real estate investor and you're looking at what do I do to get exactly what people are looking for, go ahead and become the guest. So one of the things is to switch your viewpoint and look at what is it that's important to you. So it could be lakefront properties. It could be, again, like I talked about RVs. It could be a cabin in the woods. Ironically, you might think I'm being silly, but I'm telling you, it could be camping. Oh my, yes, I'm really talking about that. It could be tiny homes. Tiny homes, there's a whole category on Airbnb that you can do for tiny homes. They also have national parks. Yes, national parks. Or if you have islands, or if you're looking for a place that has a pool. So all of those amenities are really important when you're looking, not only as the guest. Those are what guests they're looking for. So what would you like to be as a landlord having short-term rentals? What would you like to have? Would you like to have a place that has cabins? Would you like to have a place? I've talked to somebody recently who was telling me that they would really love to have a piece of land and then set up a bunch of little tiny homes on it. And that would just be a little vacation community where all these little tiny homes, they have the same place, and then it would be easier to manage. And that was his idea, was this piece of land, and then you should set up the tiny homes. That's it. And that's something that you could do as well. But remember, lakefront or beach or pools or an island or national parks, tiny homes, camping, cabins, if you wanted also to have a specific type of house that you've always wanted to be in, there's different architectural things. If you always wanted to go stay in a castle, maybe it's that you get to go stay in a castle and that's the thing that you've always wanted. Or, again, is that the rental property you as a landlord would love to have? Is it a dome house? Is it, what is it? And again, this is where your creativity can be as creative as you've ever wanted. So have you always wanted to own a houseboat? And then you could rent out the houseboat while you're not there. And this is interesting from a real estate investor's point of view. This has become something that is more and more popular because perhaps say you've always wanted to have a lakefront home, or you've always wanted to have, a really interesting houseboat, but you're trying to figure out how to justify all the costs. Well, maybe you end up doing a short-term rental for it for a certain amount of the year, and then you go and live on it for the other part of the year. So think about all those different aspects of it, because again, you're just going through the definitions of what is a short-term rental. It could be all sorts of things. It could be, again, just a room in someone's house. I mean, I've actually, when I've traveled as well, and this is the other way to really learn about it, is if you go to some of these sites and you utilize them as a guest so that you experience it. I've experienced just renting a room in someone's house. Like, for instance, one time when I was in London, I just rented a room there. I knew I was only going to be for 2 nights. And from my viewpoint, it was a very big difference because, again, I knew I was only going to be there 2 nights and I wasn't going to be in the property very much. I just needed a really great place that was safe, that I could go and spend the night. But I didn't want to spend, a couple $100 a night on a hotel. And so it's different. It depends on whether you're interested in meeting new people and having those experiences of sharing a room in someone's house, or if you want to just be able to have your own full cabin or your own tiny home or whatever it is that you're interested in. So again, the definition of what a short-term rental, that property can be, you can just stretch your mind and think about it. Again, it could be the cabin you have out back in your yard that, we call an in-law suite. It could be any number of those things. So again, whatever you would like for a short-term rental, think about it that way and know that, again, short-term rentals are going to be something that, again, pays a whole lot more money because it's short term versus something that is a long term. And again, I want to go through some of the basics. And one of the basics is the legalities of short-term rentals. So we talked a little bit about the definitions. Now I want to talk a little bit about the legalities. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I want to say it's really important that you get legal advice in whatever city and county that you're in, particularly understanding all of the regulations. The regulations for short-term rentals are different, and you need to understand what they are. For instance, do you need a business license? Are there specific permits that you need if you're renting a part of your house out? If it's a short-term rental, again, daily, weekly, monthly, what is it and what are the regulations? And make sure that you are really looking into that, because every area is different on what they allow. And you also need to keep up with this, because I would pay attention. One of the secrets, now this is where you should lean in. One of the secrets that you should really pay attention to with short-term rentals is what is the viewpoint of the government and the other homeowners that are in your particular area, because you need to, you call and ask. You want to call the city, call the county, and find out if it's something that has been a hot topic. I use my little air quotes, a hot topic on the city or the county's, their regular agenda. Is it something that is soon to change? I had some people who were investing in property out in Nevada. And it was interesting because they were finding that the regulations were changing. And it was depending on whether it was lakefront and there were those. And again, the hotels, a lot of things, just like I could compare it to Uber and the taxis. In many places, the taxis were very much against Uber. And the same thing with hotels. They're not fond of the competition of homeowners, real estate investors coming in and deciding to get into the industry that they're in. So you have to understand what's happening. So when you're going through your legal basics on short-term regulations, it's very important that you understand what's happening with them, and you understand that there is like the local regulations on that, and then there's state regulations, and of course there are federal regulations, but the local ones are going to be the ones that are the most important that you fully understand. And so if I could say that one of the ways that you can become educated and understand what you can do and what you can't do is by talking to the city, the county, and then also talking to a real estate expert that's in that area, and by talking to a lawyer who understands the legal basics for short-term rentals. And I know this sounds a little bit like, whoa, this is a little daunting, but I can tell you the first time you do anything, there's a lot to learn. And it's almost like a new language. That's why I was going over a couple words in the beginning, is just to understand that it is really important to understand those basics so that you can understand how you can, again, legally move in this, but also in a way so that it actually makes money. Because yes, and I probably should have started with this at the very beginning, it can make a lot of money. Short-term rentals can make 5 times, I've seen it as much as 8 times the amount that a long-term rental. So say, for instance, just for easy math, if you're in a location where a house rents for $1,000 a month, you could be renting that for $5,000 a month or $8,000 a month or as much as $10,000 a month. And one of the things to also look for when you're looking for trends in what you would want, would I want to rent out an RV or a houseboat or a tent? Somebody pitches a tent out back of my house, or what would you like to do? You also want to think about why people come to that area. Like, for instance, I know people in the state of Florida around the Daytona Beach area. So you're probably familiar with the Daytona 500. Well, the Daytona 500, of course, brings people from all over. And during the time, it's pretty much like a 2-week period that the Airbnbs, the short-term rentals of all natures, they become extraordinarily expensive. And, the same would be true for Nashville during the country music festival. And the same is true in Las Vegas for very specific festivals, and Miami for specific festivals. And I could go on and on, but think about that. So if there's specific festivals that people come into that area for, that is one time where a lot of people, I know people who they can make their entire mortgage for the whole year in a span of like a 1-month period where they've rented it weekly or daily. And it just becomes this extraordinary thing if you have one of these amazing things like the Daytona 500. So that's why short-term rentals can be something that you're like, whoa, it's so important to be able to know what the benefits of this is going to be and why you would want to do it. That again, you understand the legal basics with short-term rentals. That's again, you're asking the city, you're asking the county. And then the next thing is, and I know that we've talked about this before when we've had lawyers on the show, and that's that, you want to talk to a lawyer about getting a legal entity and owning the property in a legal entity. Is that an LLC, a C Corp? Again, whatever that is for you. And it depends, again, what state you're in, where you want to be. But I've found for not only liability reasons, for so many reasons, make sure that you're creating a legal entity that has so much legal protection for you. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I just would tell you from my own personal experience, that has been what I have been told by lawyers. It's really important to make sure that you have set up a legal entity. The rest of the conversation, tune in for
Listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show.